Hello dear learners, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we will be talking about Spring model, wherein we will understand what is the significance of model in Spring MVC, and then we will see its certain important methods, and we will see an example on Spring model and controller, wherein we will get data from the model and pass it on to the controller and then show it on a JSP page. So without further ado, let's get started. Spring model is one of the three important components of the model view controller architecture pattern. It is definitely one of the base components that is needed to create a MVC application. It represents the data and business logic of any application. In these objects, you can store information about your entities in the system. Let's say if you are creating a library system, then information about your books, information about your library. So all the different entities that you have in your system, you can store information about those entities in this object. It also is typically represented using simple Java classes, also known as POJOs or plain old Java objects. They are simple classes with attributes and getter setter functions in it. They also contain certain constructors in it. In another language, they are also known as bean classes. In simple terms, if I have to say, they are also known as Java beans, which can be used for representing models. Then these POJOs or these plain old Java object classes are managed by the Spring Framework's dependency injection framework, which allows you to create objects of these classes simply. You don't have to go and create objects. If they are managed by Spring, Spring will make sure that it creates objects of these classes. Then they are responsible for providing data to the view for presentation that the user can see in UI. They are also responsible for bringing the data, whatever data that the controller brings from UI, taking that data, processing it and storing them in the database. So they are representing both the ends here, wherein whatever data that the UI needs is provided by model, and whatever data that comes from UI through forms or through inputs, that is taken by it and it is given to the database. So it represents both the ends. Then there is a very important interface in the Spring MVC architecture, that is model interface, which is used for representing model data. So any data that you want to be traveling in the UI part, okay, any data that you want to send to the UI can be kept inside the objects of the model interface, and then a JSP page or any such UI can easily read this data using JSP expression languages and show that data in the UI. The example that we'll be seeing today will be showing us how to take data from the model interface and show it on the UI. Now, this particular interface is designed for adding attributes to the model, as I said earlier, and it is used to transfer data between UI and controller of the Spring MVC application. The model interface that we are talking about is contained inside the package org.springframework.ui, which has an interface known as model, and that acts as a data container and contains the data of the application. One of the most important method of this particular interface is the add attribute method. There are other methods also like add all attributes, and this add attribute also has overloaded versions, but this is the most commonly used method of the model interface, that is the add attribute method, which adds the specified attribute under the provided name. So whatever name that you give, as you can see here, I am providing a name username. Along with it, the value that I am passing here is a string value, that is John Matthew. Here the value could be any object or any list that you want to pass, or any collection that you want to pass, you can pass. So here it provides you with a name and a value concept. So here you can give a name, as you can see, username, and a value that you can see as John Matthew. This is how it is written, model object dot add attribute. Okay. Now let's understand when we have to write an example using model in an MVC application, what are the steps that we need to perform to write a complete example of Spring MVC. So for that, first thing, we will have to create a model class. Let's say we create a class, book class, wherein we'll be representing some book information and showing that in UI using a tabular format. So we'll create a class, let's say a book class that has book ID, book name, author, and genre. So various details the book class will contain. In this particular model class, we'll be adding the various attributes, as I said, book ID, book name, so on and so forth. Then we'll be generating certain setters and getters in this particular class. Along with these setters and getters, we will also create two constructors, one an argumented constructor and another a no argumented default constructor. So we'll be creating two constructors also in this particular class. These constructors are usually created for simplicity of creating objects, wherein we can simply pass the data to the constructor and create the object. In case if your model class is not Spring managed, we can use this. Then we need to create a controller class, and this controller class is going to create methods with request mapping annotation, which will be then called from the UI for getting the data from the model and showing it in the UI. We have already seen how to create methods using request mapping annotation in one of our previous videos. I'll link the video here. I'll provide the link of that particular video so you can see how to create such methods with request mapping annotation and how to return the view pages information in these request mapping methods and how do they then convert into an actual UI page. So I'll just link that here and you can check out that video. Okay. Going further, we will have to create a JSP page that will show the data that is received from the model. We'll be using JSP JSTL and we'll be using expression language here. We will also use some JSP core tags that we have in JSTL for representing this data. That's the most simplest way of showing data in a JSP page that comes from the model. So we'll be using that and showing the data in a tabular format. So let's quickly jump onto the code and see how to create a Spring MVC example. So we switch quickly onto Eclipse, and here I have already created a basic project, a basic Maven project, wherein I have created this MVC example project, and this project contains a pom.xml file wherein I have already added all the necessary dependencies that we need for this particular example to work. Okay, and then I have created a web.xml also, which contains the information about my Spring Servlet file, and here I have given these basic configurations that are needed for the controller package. Then it is annotation driven and about the internal resource view resolver. If you want to understand how this particular project is created, you can refer to one of my previous videos in which I am showing how to create a Maven project and configure it for a Spring web application using all its dependencies, etc. So you can just refer to that particular video and see how this whole project is created. So we will begin here in the Java resources. I have already created this Java package which is there. In that I will go and create a new class. I will right click here and say new, and I'll say class, and I will name this class as a book class and put it into the package com.learning.model. You can name it as model, you can name it as entity, whatever you wish, and then I'll say finish. Once I come here, I will create various attributes here, like I will say private string and I'll say book ID. Then I'll say private string book name. Okay. Then I'll say private string author, and I will say private string ISBN. So I'm taking a few values here. Okay. And once that is done, what I'll do is I'll right click here and I'll say source, and I'll say generate getters and setters. I'll say select all and I'll say generate So it will generate all the getter and setter methods that I need for my attributes. Then I'll again right click, I'll say source, and I'll say generate constructor using fields, which will create a constructor for me with various fields that are there, or the various attributes that I have. Then I can again right click and I can say source, and I can say generate constructor from superclass. So I always recommend that you should leverage all the features that a IDE is giving to make it simple for you to write code. It should not become a pain. It should be as simple, for us. The more simpler it is, the more we are encouraged to write better code. So here you can see I have created this particular book class. Once this particular book class is created, what we need to do is we need to right click again, and we'll say new, and we'll say class, and we will name this as an MVC controller. Okay, and we will say finish. Once this particular class is created, we will add an @controller annotation on it. Okay, and we will create one method here, that is public string, because we'll be returning the view name here, and then we will say get book details, and in this particular class we will add a object of the model interface. So I'll say model, and I'll create the class. On top of it, I'll be using an @request mapping annotation. Okay, and inside this I'm going to say the URL is going to be book details. Okay, that is going to be the URL that will come from UI. I'll also import the request mapping annotation and the model interface. After creating the method, we will create an object of the book class. So I'll say book from our package. Then I'll say book1 is equals to new book, and I'll be naming this as B001. That is my book ID. Then I have book name. So I'll say book name is, let's say, book1. Then I'll say I have the author. So I'll say it is author 1, and then I'll say it is, the last thing that we need here is the ISBN number. So I'll say ISBN number is 1234. Okay, I'm keeping it simple right now because the intention is not what data is coming, the intention is how the data is coming. I will similarly create other objects of the book class. So I'll create some 5 such objects, and I will change their values here. And I'll say this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, and this is 5. Then I'll also change the book names to 2, 3, 4, and 5. Similarly, I'll change certain authors. I will not change all the author values, and I'll just say this is also 3. Then the ISBN numbers, I'll just change it to 5, 6, 7, and 8. So this is some basic information that I'm getting from the book object. Then I'll create a array list. So I'll say list of book, and I'll say book list is equals to new array list, and I'll provide the value. Okay, inside this particular array list, I need to import list and array list here. So I'll import java.util similarly here also. Then I'll say book list dot add, and I'll add all the books to this book 1. Then similarly I'll add all the other books 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'll say add book 2, add book 3, add book 4, and add book 5. Once this is done, our main work starts, wherein we will say model dot add attribute. You can see there are other attributes also, like add all attributes is there, add attribute also with only object is there. So you can decide what kind of values you want. Similarly, there are other methods also, contains attribute, as map, it will help you in converting it as a map. Then you have merge attributes. So there are a lot of such methods which are available, but as I said earlier, the most commonly used one is add attribute. So I'll name this as book list, okay, and I will provide the book list object to it. Once this is done, I have to return to the page, book details page. So I'll say return, and I'll say book details is going to be my JSP page. So I'll return the view name. Again, we had seen this in our previous video of how to return the name of the JSP page, and then how that JSP page name is inferred by the Spring Servlet using this internal view resolver. It helps you in resolving what this name is using the path, etc. So we had seen that in our previous video, and you can check that out there. So we've created this simple method wherein we are creating objects of the book class, passing it to a list and returning that book list. So we are adding it into the model, and this model object will be available here in the UI. Now let's quickly go and create a UI for it. So we'll right click on our web app folder, which is inside src main web app. We have this folder. We'll right click here, and we will create a new JSP page, and we will name this JSP page as index.jsp. This is going to be our first page, so we'll just name it as index.jsp, and we will keep it just simple here. We'll keep it as book portal, and we'll name this as home page. This is going to be the title. We will similarly have a h1 wherein we will put this. We'll say h1, and we'll say book portal home page, and then we will create a simple hyperlink. We'll say ahref equals to, and here we will say book details, the way we had mentioned it in the request mapping. So I'll say book details, and I'll provide a name here as book details, which will take us to the book details page and show the details of all these books. So it has to match to this name. Book details that we've given here should match here. Okay, so we are providing that, and it will take us to the book details page. We will create this particular book details page as shown here inside WebINF view, and it is going to be a JSP page. So we'll already have a folder created here inside WebINF view. We'll just right click on this, say new, and say JSP file, and we will name this as book details. Now this name has to match with what you have given here in the return, book details. So that is what the name has to match, book details.jsp. Here also we will just keep it simple. We will say book portal, and we'll name this as book details, and we'll just take the same thing in an h1 and put that as a title for the page. Once this is done, we'll try to create a simple table. We'll say table, and it will have a t head which will contain our headers. So we'll say tr, and we'll say th, and inside this we will say book id. Okay, close this. Similarly, we will have book name. So I'll say book id, then I'll say book name, then I will say author, and finally I will say ISBN. Okay, and close this particular row and close the t head. After that, I'll create a t body which will contain my table, and inside this I will be using a for each loop of the core tags in JSTL. So for that I will have to include a taglib directive. So I'll say percentage, and I'll say taglib, percentage @taglib. Then I will provide the URI as the core tags. So it is java.sun.com/JSP/JSTL core. This is the library that we have to take, and I will include a prefix as C. Okay, so I'll have this particular prefix, and then I will say C : for each. So we have this for each loop available in the core tags, and because this is a list, it has an attribute called as items which we can use, and then we will use the expression language, that is dollar curly bracket, to give the same name that we had added in the model. So if you come back and see here in the model, we had added a name book list. This is the name that we need to pass here. I'll say book list, and I can create a variable here, that is B1, which we will use inside the loop. So here then we will create a row. So I'll say tr, and inside this tr I will have various TDs, and these TDs will contain the information for all the columns. So the first one is going to be dollar, in curly bracket I will say B1 dot book ID. So I can represent them like this using the B1 object. Similarly, I will have for the other fields also, that is book name. It has to match with this variable names that we have here, book ID, book name, author and ISBN. It has to match to that. Then I will say I have author and I will have ISBN. So I am showing all the 4 values here, and this is where my TR will end. So for every row I will be using the for each loop, which will create each row and represent the data for each and every column that I have. So once this is done, we just need to save all this and we can then go ahead and test it. So for testing this particular project, we will right click on MVC example and we will say run as, run on server, and we will say finish. The moment we say finish, it will land up on this home page wherein we've said book portal home page, and it is landing directly here on this home page because we've already given here that our first page is going to be index.jsp. Okay, so we immediately land onto the home page here, and we'll just refresh it once to make sure it is taking all the changes. And when you click on this book details link, it should take you to the book details page. You can see it is actually showing us the request mapping, whatever URL that we had given. It is not showing us the name of the JSP page, but yet it is getting us the details of all the books. You can see book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5, and it is showing us the book details which we had added here in the book object and then into the model object. So the model data is then carried to the book details JSP page when it comes to this page, and you can use that data using the for each loop and represent the data in the UI. So this is how you can write a simple example using Spring MVC, wherein we had created a book class which was representing my model, and it was storing all book related information in it, which the controller was creating objects of, that is coordinating and getting the data from the book class, putting it into a list and giving it into the model attribute, which was holding all the data that we wanted to show. This was then used in the view page. So we had a model class, that is book. We had a MVC controller class, which was our controller, and then we had the JSP page wherein we were using that book list object that was added to the model and showing the data. So that is it all about in this particular video of how to create a simple example on model, and we saw a whole example here using the model, view and controller, all 3 different objects, and how they are interacting with each other with proper configuration and showing our data. This example can further be extended by creating databases, and rather than we creating objects and putting data into it, we can bring data from the database and show that data into the model objects or your model class and putting the data into it, those Pojo classes, and giving it to model and then showing it into the UI. So that is it for today. If you have any questions, you can put them into comment and I'll try and answer to your questions. Also, please subscribe to my channel, like my videos and share it with your family and friends for whom it will be beneficial if they want to learn Spring framework. And that is it for today. Thank you. Bye-bye.